book for Italy?
Okay, well, thank you first for inviting me. I'm very sorry that she's not here, and I don't know why. But anyway, well, the decision came almost, I would say, spontaneously because I proposed this book. She sent it to me when she was in the draft stage, because I was, I would say, a reader of her very previous work. In one interview of mine, she told me that Humanomics project started with the Rhetorics of Economics, the most famous book of her, I would say, after the trilogy, the by now famous trilogy, the bourgeois era trilogy. And so I started talking with her about the possibility of having the book translated into Italian. And she was, of course, very happy about that. So I had the proposal, I mean, I sent the proposal to the Lewis University Press. And I would say we were very lucky because the editor-in-chief of the Lewis University Press was an estimator of her. So when he received this proposal, he said, well, I just want to publish this. And at the beginning, he also decided to publish another very popular book of her that is Leave Me Alone and I'll Make You Rich, which is the pop version of the trilogy. Now, should I say something about this book? I think it's, as I said, a continuation of the Rhetorics of Economics, at least in one respect, because it's an attempt to reintroduce the humanities in economics. By humanities, of course, she has in mind not only the rhetoric as such, but also literature and histories or poetry, even because she's used to cite some poetry, even in the Humanomics book. So if I had to qualify this book, I would say that first of all is this attempt to regain humanities into economics, so as economics is at the same time both quantitative and qualitative in some respects. She is used to repeat that she's both quantitative and qualitative. And on the other hand, the title is, in a sense, pass me the bad word, stolen, but she acknowledged that to her friend Bart Wilson and Vernon Smith, the Nobel laureate in economics. They wrote a book that was published a few years before with the title Humanomics. And she always acknowledged that the invention of the term is to be attributed to Bart Wilson, even though she used that term 10 years ago already in a paper that is almost unknown indeed. The second characteristic of this book, beyond, I would say, the attempt to reintroduce humanities into economics, is that this book was born originally, and this is something that many doesn't know, was born originally as a unique book, a very long book that in the end the Chicago publishing house decided to split into two books. The first one that was published was not Humanomics, but a critique to neo-institutional economics, positivism, and etc. It's a very long title. Sorry if I don't remember all the single words of the title, but it's about the critique of neo-institutionalism. And the reason is that her very first article on humanomics was published in the Journal of Institutional Economics, directed by Geoff Hodgson. And it was, as such, a critique of neo-institutional economics. In particular, the idea that the critique of the naive assumption that institution matters, because one of her claims is that ideas matter, culture matters, rather than institution. And the polemic with the neo-institutional scholars was launched by Geoff Hodgson himself. So he invited scholars to reply to Deirdre Closkey's article, Humanomics. And it was a rather interesting, I would say, editorial success, because that article by Deirdre Closkey was highly cited and is still among the most cited article in the Journal of Institutional Economics. So I would say that the second common trait, at least the trait that unites the critique to neo-institutionalism and Humanomics book, is this idea that ideas matter, culture matter, in the sense that institutions are not enough to make the world works. And this can be, and I would conclude on this, well, maybe after Marco's discussion, I could try to reply or to add something more. But the third key idea of Humanomics is that it can be traced back to the trilogy itself. One of the main attempts of the trilogy put forward by Deirdre is her claim that it was liberalism that made us rich. And by liberalism, she implies that it's the culture of liberalism, ideas put forward by liberalism that made us rich in many respects, according to her, more equal and also, of course, freer than ever. And when I say than ever, it's because the great discovery, let's call it the great discovery that Deirdre, on which Deirdre insisted so much, is the so-called hockey stick of human progress. Because still, I mean, the Industrial Revolution and a few years later, the Industrial Revolution, the progress was really flat. At a certain point, the introduction of liberal ideas, according to her, made this big change. So the trilogy is an attempt to reply to the big question put forward by Adam Smith, and the title of his gigantic work, inquiry into the nature of the causes of the wealth of nations. So the great question was what makes us rich, and she, in a sense, tried to reread the theory of moral sentiment by Adam Smith and say, well, Adam Smith is talking about the bourgeois virtue, and these bourgeois virtues are key to understand the human progress. So to sum up, on the one hand, we have an attempt to reintroduce humanities into economics. Secondly, there is an attempt to put forward, to stress the relevance of ideas rather than institution that matters into the economic world. And thirdly, it's liberty and liberalism that matters more than institution for the human progress. Having said that, I would leave the floor to Marco, which is perhaps who is perhaps was written down or jotted down some notes on that book, and let's see what he's going to say. Maybe I'm going to add something more or even reply to Marco.
Okay, thank you. I'm quite embarrassed because being a discussant doesn't mean that you prepared a formal presentation of the book, and I didn't prepare any formal presentation of the book. I was ready to make some comments and possibly objections to Deirdre Closkey presentation, which I cannot do now because I have to make a sort of presentation of the book and of its content. On the other hand, I'm happy in a way. I feel relieved because I feel very much this debate with McCloskey, because obviously for me she is a sort of maître pensée since my younger age, and also someone who influenced very much my approach to the history of economics. At the same time, the book is so rich of readings, comments about the history of philosophy, historiography, economic historiography, sociology, anthropology, and so on and so forth, that makes a sort of gap between what she argues and what she says, and what can be my humble comments about it. And there was another reason to fear this debate, and the reason was that the book is constructed in a way that objections are objected, and this is the typical rhetorical strategy. The third part of the book is a reply to all the objections that have been addressed to main arguments about the content summarized in this book. So in a way, I suggest to make this meeting among us much more informal than was intended to be if the McCloskey had been here. Now, I will try to make an improvisazione and make a sort of presentation.
Marco, sorry, before you start, I've just received an email by Bart who saw my email and he told me that he just got into the office and he hasn't seen her so far. So he's worried too about her not being present there.
Okay.
Anyway, let's...
So far it's confirmed that she isn't here. Let me go on. If she shows up, obviously we can modify our schedule at any moment. I said that I already anticipated the third part of this book, which is a sort of a reply to the main objections, a reply that is in itself convincing, in that as always happens, objections are addressed to single aspects of a broad argument that is not necessarily destroyed. Sorry, I cannot find a better term at the moment. Destroyed by this critique, and so she replies by repeating the great argument that she has developed about liberalism and modern welfare. Now, the first part is the book is composed of three parts. The first part is a plea in favor of the use of the employment of the use of humanities in economics, and the second part is a sort of demonstration that she calls a killer app, because she was asked to give a killer app to justify her main argument, and this demonstration is based on her main subject or her main theme of research about the great enrichment, the bourgeois compact, and what it produced in modern society. So, concerning the first part, at the end, I want to say also something about the translation, not technically, but the importance of this translation for the Italian debates. As to the first part argues that we need the first part is partially based on the other book that, as Paolo said, composes this sort of twin approach to the problem of restoring humanities in economics, which is the critique of neo-institutional economics and behaviorism in economics. After all, the critique of mainstream economics is based on the argument of an individual who reacts to incentives like an animal, he says, in a way, like animals in a way, and a simplified vision of the individual who maximizes utility, who is a sort of fightful follower of, I don't know how it is in English, massimo utile, max u, sort of personification of the utility maximization. So the argument of mainstream economics is poor in itself for the vision it has of the human beings interacting in the sphere of the economy, in the sphere of the market, in the market sphere, and in their normal relationships in society, which are obviously based on economic activities. The idea is that here she quotes Adam Smith, obviously, and when Adam Smith says that exchange is based on persuasion and on the desire to be approved by the impartial spectator, so she argues that had understood that most of the interactions in the market. Oh, the Closkey is showing up. I see.
Finally, I apologize so much if it got the speech.
Where's the camera?
Can you hear me, dears?
Yes, we can hear you. Welcome.
I apologize so much for this. Bart Wilson and I are working intensively on a paper on humanomics. And you know how it is. You get sort of absorbed. And I forgot what I was doing this morning. I'm terribly sorry. Bart is here with me.
Oh, good. It's okay. We just started discussing
Oh, good.
book. So
Bart is trying to get my. Tell me what you're trying to do.
Just the camera, okay.
Your camera doesn't seem to be available here.
Oh, it doesn't. But there's a picture of me here.
Well, there's a name, but there's no picture.
But what's this? Who's this? Oh, that's someone else.
Yeah. And I don't see the option here.
He's trying to fix it. He understands these things much better than an 81-year-old woman.
by the way, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you perfectly well. Is there anyone else? There are other people.
There are 20 people here.
Oh, gee, I feel so guilty. Oh.
And we look forward to hear you about your book, Better Humanomics.
Okay.
Well, it's quite good that we're talking about it because, as I said, Bart Wilson at Chapman University and I'm at Chapman right now, as perhaps you know, in California until for a few more days. And we're working on precisely this subject, humanomics. And I think just to start the discussion, and I hope you'll feel free to break in with questions or suggestions or arguments and say, no, you're wrong. What he and I have realized in this 2 weeks that we've been thinking about it, and I can't seem to get my face on it.
Yes. So either
Hold it. He's going to do something. What?
So either you do it without the video, or you send me the link and I can get the video on my machine downstairs, and then you can come downstairs and do a video there.
Okay. Why don't you start doing that?
So then forward me that. This email.
Bart,
You do it. You do it. You
Bart, can you hear me, Bart?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, it's Paolo, and so I will forward you the link to your email, okay?
Oh, good. Thank you, dear.
And I can log in, that might kick her off, but then you'll know it's successful.
Okay. I'm sorry
Thank you
about
so
it.
much.
But here's our what I think is a quite sharp and interesting discovery in the conversation that Bart and I have had. But what defines a humanomics? And you can see this in all kinds of people on the left, on the right, in the middle. Gramsci, for example, is admitting or acknowledging the importance of language. And of course, Adam Smith did this. He most particularly in the theory of moral sentiments, but even in the Wealth of Nations, he's repeatedly gesturing towards language as the kind of central part the economy. And I think that's, I mean, it's sort of, it's an obvious point. And it's surprising that it's taken me, you know, five or six decades to understand it. But I think it's a helpful sort of simple definition of what a humanomics might consist of. What the parts of Adam Smith and our other ancestors that economists emphasize, especially since the 1930s and Robbins at the London School of Economics, and then Paul Samuelson, and then Milton Friedman, all of them arguing that behavior was what we should be focused on, as though humans were not speakers, as though, to be sure, they could convey information, right? That one could send a price, one could accept a price offer or not. But sort of, for example, complaining about the price would be completely pointless in the kind of economics that most economists understand they're doing. Now, the way we've organized the paper, and if I had had the wit, if I had understood this better when I wrote that book, I would have done the same thing, is to have a rather long section. We're aiming this paper for the Journal of Economic Literature. To put it mildly, the editors have not invited us to do this, so it's going to be something we submit to them, and I hope they publish it. But it's of course then aimed at economists, not at other humanists or social scientists who recognize the power of language, but to economists who don't. And we're early in this paper, we are proposing a big section on the scientific evidence that language is the distinguishing feature of humans. I mean, after all, for hundreds of years, when this matter of what's the distinction between animals and humans, we always said, yes, reason, the capacity of reason, as Smith says in the beginning of the second chapter of The Wealth of Nations, the faculty of reason. And we would argue and Bart is an expert in this sort of thing, the study of animals in the last, maybe half century, has very substantially pulled down this wall, this particular wall, the reason wall between humans and animals. For example, octopuses, which differ from us by 1 billion years of evolution since the division of animals with backbones and animals without backbones. 1 billion years, if you add it all, 500 million plus 500 million, they have reason too. They have problem-solving ability, for example. It's not all instinct. It's not even simple stimulus and response. Now Bart is here. He's going to advise me what to do.
So you can go down to my office and you'll be on the screen.
And it's all arranged?
Yeah, there's somebody called Deirdre 2 on the screen.
Okay.
That's you.
I'm going to go downstairs. it'll only take a minute to Bart's office, and then you'll be able to see me. I'm not sure this is an advantage, but it may break your cameras, but still, I'll try. I'll be right there, dears, right there. In the meantime, do feel free to, if a thought occurs to you, I'd be delighted to hear it. Okay, I'll be right back. Damn, it's so stupid. Oh, actually, in a way, I'm glad because
I see Marco Guidi writing down new questions.
No, just notes.
Notes for anyway. At the end, we succeeded.
Yes.
Hi, here I am down in Bart's office. Let's see, can you see me? Yeah, here I am. Hi.
Okay.
Nice to see you.
So
finally.
I'm extremely pleased to have a chance to talk about this, I don't know what you'd call it, this small advance on what I was saying in the book. How can I could go on this way. I could go on and tell you more of what Bart and I are trying to do. But the key thing, as I said, is to establish early in this paper for the Journal of Economic Literature that we're proposing to show the massive scientific evidence, the massive non-economic scientific evidence of the importance of language to humans. I mean, you know, it's obvious. But, you know, let me take this interesting Italian example, because it's not just what I always call Samuelsonian economics, which ignores language. It was also classical Marxism that ignored language. As a former Marxist, I have some knowledge of this, and Gramsci, in a sense, was doing humanomics in a Marxist framework. And some of the other people who we cite, and I cite them in the book to some degree, are people like Albert Hirschman. The disgraceful fact that Hirschman didn't get the Nobel Prize is one that has significantly reduced my opinion of the Nobel Prize. But, you know, Albert did humanomics. Even in his early work on economic development, he did, but certainly in books like Exit Voice and Loyalty, and his book on early modern thinking on the economy, which they call The Passions and the Interests. Albert Hirschman does humanomics. In a sense, Keynes also did humanomics. And Bart and I are anxious to not just leave the discussion of humanomics in the opposition to the Samuelsonians or the Chicago School, but to make sure that we talk about the hints of humanomics, or the serious attempts to do it in various other parts of the study of humans in the ordinary business of life, as Alfred Marshall defined it. So someone like, well, certainly the Austrians qualify as tending to humanomics. They often stop short at incentives. But a person like, a figure like Lachman, who was an early student of Mises, but also was a student of the great Marxist economic historian, whose name is escaping me, but he was the last student of this Marxist historian and almost the first student of Mises. So he combines, and in any case, he's very, Lachman, as an Austrian economist, is very focused on language as what humans do. And having established in this section we're proposing, and that I half do in the book, that language is the defining characteristic of humans, and not reason, which is, after all, shared by any form of life. Any form of life is problem solving, if that's what you mean by rationality, or else it doesn't live. Every form of life, by entry and exit over the long run, adjusts to its environment, if that's what you mean by reason. What's peculiar about humans is this abstract ability, this ability to abstract in thinking, and to talk about, either in your own head or with other people, about these abstractions. I mean, obviously, well, the one example we give is the dog. The dog, you say to the dog, bad boy, you've pooped on the carpet or something, bad boy. Which incidentally shows that along with language comes ethics, and only with language. But in any case, the dog has no abstract ability to think about the bad boy concept. Neither, well, certainly not the bad part. He's ashamed, he cowers, and we shout at him, say bad boy. Still, he has no, as I said, he has no way of getting above the mere behavioral reaction, or the mere, dogs have emotions. Anyone who's owned a dog knows that. But they're not symbolizing. I suppose that's the key. That's the key to language. They're not. They're signaling, like saying, yeah, I see what you mean, because that's very human. But oh yeah, you're yelling at me you're shouting at me for pooping on the carpet. Yeah, gosh. But that's as far as they get. It appears. As you can see, I'm a dog lover. But it's not then that the dog goes on to think about it. Humans, obviously, talk with each other about the ordinary business of life, but then they go on to talk about the gods, say, or about the urgent necessity to mount an expedition to Syracuse, or whatever. And so, in topic after topic in economics, you can see the force of language. Let's take investment, this central claim that economists make, that investment is the heart of the economy. I don't happen to think it is. I think that innovation is the key. But let's talk about accumulation and investment. And it's obvious that investment is about the future. Goes without saying. Or actually saying it's very important in thinking about it, because as soon as you're talking about the future, as the archaeologists point out, or the students, such as they are, about on the origin of language, you're talking about something that's not present. You're talking about something over the hill, so to speak, that we can't see. Ordinary signaling, such as birds do when they see a hawk, they shout out to their friends, "Watch out, the hawk is there." That's just a signal. It's not a symbol. It's not a discussion about something that's not there. And of course, it's central to macroeconomics and to the much of economics thinking, that economics, the whole subject in a way, is about the future, about the present decisions about the future, and in particular investment and its role in macroeconomics is entirely about expectations formed in human thought and human language. The chatter on the street and the in the bourse is language dominated. And all of us, I think, could go on talking about this particular item of expectations about the future as a linguistic phenomenon and as a characteristically human phenomenon, hence humanomics. Well, I've spoken enough for the time being. Can we have a discussion about this? Because I want to steal your ideas.
Sure. Marco, if you want to go on with your questions or observations,
Yes,
comments.
I must say that I entirely agree on the structure of these arguments, and so about the importance of taking humanities seriously when we discuss the foundations of economics, and we set up the toolbox of economics in a way that it makes sense, considering the main characteristics of human being. After all, here we are exchanging incentives,
Exactly.
and
I'm not
so
paying you to talk.
entirely agree on it. I agree on the critique of the mainstream approach, which reduces human beings to like this, machines, or just animals responding to incentives in a behaviorist way. And obviously, I am strongly against behaviorism also as something that affects directly my personal experience. For example, in the treatment of autistic children, there is a discussion whether you have to use a behaviorist approach and giving them incentives to improve their abilities of relationships. And there is an opposing view that tries to stimulate their emotions and so on and so forth. And I strongly agree on this alternative view, because even for an autistic child, you don't need to in a way manipulate his abilities by introducing a set of incentives. You have to develop his ability to interact with people in a way that even with the weakness of this approach makes sense for him. My child, for example, doesn't speak. He doesn't have language, but he has his own kind of language, and this kind of language is what we have to develop. So this is my personal story, but it's a reason, a further reason in favor of strongly disagreeing with the behaviorist approach. And so I agree that also in economics, we have to fight against the poorness of this approach as a view of the human being and the human interaction.
Can I just make one small remark? This is a remarkable story about your child and about this whole matter. And indeed, it's there. It's right at that point that we talk about the politics and the ethics. Should other human beings be treated like vending machines or
Yes.
dogs to be trained, or should they be treated like humans?
Yes, this is the point with which I agree. Concerning the structure of your book, in the first part, you argue about this point with various arguments. Then there is a second part about the killer app, and I would like to stimulate us to tell something about this killer app and how it is a demonstration of the soundness of this humanistic approach to economics.
Yeah, and of course the killer app that I talk about in the book is the one that I'm most interested in as an economic historian. But I think we're all interested in the nature and causes of the wealth of nations. And I claim, of course, in this second part that it's the new language of, I always stutter on my favorite word, the new language of liberty in the 18th century that leads to, well, the modern world, leads to our enrichment, leads to our political development, almost no matter how you define the word liberal, all liberals are against the old rules of hierarchy. I think the core definition of liberalism is anti-hierarchical and in favor of equality of some sort. The old rule was that kings always win, women always lose. And we liberals together oppose this. And remarkably, in an unanticipated fashion, the slow development of this idea in the 19th and 20th centuries led to an enormous economic change. And my claim is that well, one way of expressing it is that slaves or serfs don't innovate, that subordinated women don't innovate, that colonized people don't innovate, that they're being held down, they're being held to the old rules, that kings win, women lose, colonized people lose, and so forth. So my claim, and it's very much against the instincts, you might say, of my colleagues, my beloved colleagues in economics, who are, we're all Marxists now. We all believe that to be scientific, we must be materialists. And I'm arguing against that. I'm saying that it's an intellectual, not intellectual so much as well, intellectual, political even sociological change that occurred mainly, I claim, in Northwestern Europe. That's the big example, the big turning point. But in the paper that Bart Wilson and I are working on, and even more, and the point is, let me just say two more sentences. The point is, of course, that the material explanations of what I call the great enrichment, which I think is a better phrase than a more scientifically accurate phrase than the Industrial Revolution, although you can use both. The material explanations don't work very well for two reasons. Conventional production functions face diminishing returns. So only if you have a kind of Paul Romer idea, by the way, Paul was a student of mine at the University of Chicago, notion that ideas are the crucial thing. Are you going to understand this amazing change? That's the economic sort of scientific objection to materialist arguments like foreign trade or canals or even property rights on the one hand. And then there's a historical point, which I make in the book, which is that, you know, since all these material things, these non-liberal material things happened before, why didn't Rome have a great enrichment? And it didn't. Not on the incredible magnitude of the modern increase from $2 a day worldwide to about $50 a day worldwide in the same prices. But in our essay, we're going to put Bart's very interesting pointing to an anomaly. That's essentially what I just said. There's an anomaly in the explanation of the great enrichment, the diachronic, the through time part of modern economic science. But Bart points out from the experimental economist point of view that the synchronic gap or anomaly in modern economics is that in actual experiments and of course in actual behavior too, observed behavior, actors, agents, we call them, leave money on the table. For example, in the so-called dictator game, you know, as you know, in experimental economics and game theory, they have very boring games. They're not as interesting as chess or football or something. But anyway, the most boring game you can think of is the dictator game, where there are two people, and one is assigned to be the dictator, and he has $100, and she doesn't have anything. She's the other person, and he decides how much to give to her. He gets endowed with $100, and then the question is, how do they share out the $100? Now, of course, Samuelsonian Max U can only accommodate the experimental fact that actual humans, when faced with this choice, do not take the whole $100. They typically give 20%, say, to her. You know, then there are many examples of this. If it's not service compris in the restaurant, people give tips. You know, they're never going to come to that restaurant again. They give tips, and over and over again, people in this sort of poker example, metaphor, leave money on the table. And the way that's replied to in experimental economics, as Bart points out, is by adding into the utility function a parameter for generosity, say. So I have a taste for generosity, G, put G in the thing. And there are lots and lots of problems with this. The main one is, well, one of the problems that Bart points out is that our sense of justice is as much located in the language we use and the kind of society we're in as in our brains. If the idea is that you have a G variable in your head and that's what motivates you to give charity and to I don't know, to leave tips and to not in the dictator king take all the money. Let's see, it's as much the surrounding language. The famous humanistic joke is that, do we speak the language or does the language speak us? You know, I think there are some things that can be said in Italian that can't be said in English. Sempre caro mi fu quest'ermo cole. I've been to the very place. So anyway, those two examples, the one that I give in my book, much compressed to one page of JEL print, and Bart's example of his work of the, what would you call it? Well, as I said, the anomaly in the way people in experimental economics or in behavioral economics talk. Those are the two big examples we use in the book, just as I use the so-called killer apps, which is mainly, of course, my own work, my own claims.
Marco, hai altre osservazioni?
Yes. Now, I have many suggestions coming from this idea that human beings are characterized by language and by persuasion and by the faculty of speech in a way. If we agree on this, and if we agree that economics has to take seriously this point, I think we have to take it seriously, even concerning the justification of this approach, and also the justification of our current situation. People discuss, people interact, people are even critical vis-a-vis this development. For example, today there are plenty of critiques. So can they really be defeated with the argument, let's say, utilitarian arguments that we had a great enrichment, and so in a way this demonstrates that liberty is the cause of it, and that in a way it's a good thing, or should we take different arguments, for example, arguments in favor of the rights, or those who, at least in the short period, are victims, as it were, of this of the bourgeois compact, for example. So the idea that, okay, we accept that that the bourgeoisie must accumulate wealth because tomorrow even the poorest part of the population will enjoy some benefits from this development. But in the short run, people suffer. In the short run, people make claims. In the short run, people listen to populist leaders who convince them that there must be protection against immigration, there must be protection against unemployment, and so on and so forth. So how can we really react to this fact that language is a complex thing and that makes society very complex and probably also economic development very, very difficult to be sustained in the long period?
Yeah, well, I completely agree with you. And it's since the writing of the book that I've stumbled forward in thinking about this. And in the last couple of years, I keep saying to myself, look, economic change, let's not call it development because that kind of biases the case, but economic change hurts someone. Sempre. I mean, it's not just once in a while. Always. John Stuart Mill on Liberty skirts around this issue. He says, well, we should allow, kind of in the way, eventually that Pareto and Caldor Hicks argued later on. He says, well, we should allow, and then John Rawls, again, another version of the same idea, that as long as people are helped in some sense on the whole, maybe the least favored, or anyway, the average person is helped, then everything's fine, we should go forward, and the liberal economy is just a wonderful thing. And the trouble is, of course, that any change hurts someone. If any of you write a better book on humanomics than I do, and it wouldn't be hard, I'm hurt. And that's an externality. That's a non-pecuniary externality. I mean, suppose I could arrange to pay you to not write your book. But as Ronald Coase said to me late in his life, not that I was a big friend of Ronald Coase, but he said this to me. He asked me, what do you think about extortion? And I think I'm not really sure what he's thinking, but I think he was thinking along these lines. That we in society, if we're not Crusoe on the island, we're bumping into each other all the time. We're exceeding each other. We're irritating each other. Anyone who's been married knows this, right? And those are unpaid. I just reviewed a book for an English magazine by Joe Stiglitz, who's a very nice guy, man of the left, kind of not terribly far left. And Joe just persistently talks about externalities justifying state intervention. Well, okay, I think some things, I agree with Joe on some things. We really should do something, or someone should do something about global warming. That's a worry, and we need to maybe regulate immigration from Africa and the Middle East into Europe, and there are things that are bad. There are externalities in the world, but the trouble is that using this argument, sort of, how do I say it, without in an unrestrained fashion, as Joe does, is very bad, results in a very bad society. If I wear an ugly dress, right, everyone who sees it is offended. it said, oh God, what a piece of terrible checked, big checks, badly fitting, burnt orange dress, terrible dress. Does that mean we should have a clothing police? It's an externality. You can't make financial deals about it, at least not easily. So yes, so my claim is, my defense of the liberal society then is to say, look, we got to stop thinking of it in entirely utilitarian ways. We got to extract ourselves from thinking that we can do philosophy entirely with, well, one way of expressing it is that act utilitarianism is not a good guide. We need to do at least go up a level to rule utilitarianism, right? So we're saying, so the kind of social decision we should be making is what I call in the book and elsewhere an ideological commitment to treating each other with dignity and not coercion, not physical coercion. So I'm and I think your suggestion, your implicit or maybe explicit suggestion that I and Bart and everyone else who wants to go down this road, we've got to we have to be talking to people for example, other than just economists, and certainly other than orthodox economists. I don't like to call them mainstream because that makes me a backwater. And I don't want to be put in the backwater. But in any case, I think we've got to talk to people who we don't agree with politically or methodologically or scientifically as well. Because I think that this idea that language matters mightily to an economy, which Adam Smith understood very well. He was almost the last economist to really understand it, first and last. As I said before, applies to Marxism, it applies to institutional economics, both the old German historical school and to neo-institutionalism in the style of Douglas North. It applies to, that is to say, I think it can illuminate all of them.
I think someone who, in a way, followed Adam Smith on this track is Amartya Sen, who, in his idea of justice, rediscovers the approach, the impartial spectator approach of Adam Smith as a possible strategy for developing ethical views about our society that can be shared by people with different aims, different cultures, different endowments, and so on. So in this way, this leads me to ask you whether if we take, now let me make this comment, if we take humanities seriously, and I agree on this, for example, one of the humanistic sciences that is relevant is ethics, obviously, moral philosophy. And so when we move from this to justifying modern liberty and its benefits for society, we have to ask ourselves if the philosophical justification of modern liberty in terms of the greater enrichment is not only sufficient, but also acceptable for everybody. I recognize that in the answer, in the reply to the objections that are displayed in the book, you already answered something about this. For example, about the fact that the poor cannot agree, may not agree on the bourgeois compact. But what do you think about this? About the justification of the great enrichment in philosophical terms?
Well, I admire Amartya's work very much, but I don't think he goes far enough. I think Amartya, for his sort of time, as it were, which is partly my time, made advanced economic thinking. So I think he deserved a Nobel Prize. Yes, yes, yes. And his advance is indeed to bring ethical philosophy in a serious way into thinking about economic development in particular. And he and Martha, whom I know much better, I know Martha much better than I know Amartya. Martha Nussbaum, and he speak of kind of equality that I reject. I think the core, and this is a somewhat new thought in my head. I've just finished a paper, which I'll be glad to send to anyone who wants it, for a collective volume edited by Cass Sunstein, who's a professor of law and a nudger. He wants to nudge people. He wants to help them out. I'm from the Harvard Law School and I want to help you out. Here's what you should do. And my paper is called Equality of Permission, because I think that the equality or the partial equality of opportunity that Amartya and Martha advocate for has got to be kept distinct from the core liberal idea that you're not to be the slave, the physically coerced slave of anyone, not your husband, not the state, not anyone, not any other person, not the mafia, not anyone. What I don't like about his book on development as freedom is that the capabilities that he and Martha suggest are mixing two ideas which have gotten separated, or not, that's not quite how to put it. In English, as so often the case in English, there are two words for the same thing: freedom and liberty. In Italian, there's not. In German, there's not. But English, of course, was heavily influenced by French and so on. Okay. So the problem in English in the last 100 years is that the word freedom has been redefined economically as having a high budget line, being endowed perhaps in some minimal way with goods and services. You know, people say, and I agree with them, that there's not much freedom if the person's starving. But in English, the word liberty, I mean, these words meant in the ancient world, of course, they meant not being a slave. That's all they meant. You were a freeman a free man. In Latin, the liber is a big word, but it's a social word. It's a political word. And it's not about being rich. You can be a slave, yet have lots of goods and services provided to you. And so we still need, we need, in English, on English tongues, the word liberty has kept its political value, its valence. It still means, when native English speakers use it, it means, or can't, it means not being under someone's physical domination. Whereas the word freedom, as in Franklin Roosevelt's speech in 1941, freedom from want, freedom from scarcity. Well, I think that the political liberty of equality of permission does result in people being more equal at the starting line than they once were, and more equal at the finish line than they once were. But equality of permission is merely the right to join the race wherever you start. And I think that's the core of modern liberalism. And I think I've wandered off your question.
Yes, yes.
Sorry, Marco, sorry. I would like to ask all the participants if they have questions
Exactly.
and comments to raise their hand so that Professor Closkey can reply. Well, until I don't see.
There's one.
Paolo Ramazzotti, please.
Hello. I appreciated your presentation up to now. I have a few doubts. First, you seem to take it for granted that liberty leads to the great enrichment.
That who leads to the greater? Well, that what leads to the greater enrichment?
That liberty leads to the great enrichment, or in any case, that there is a link between liberty and economic well-being somehow. Okay.
I don't so much take it for granted or do it somehow. I have 3 big books filled with evidence that it does.
Because your emphasis on humanomics would suggest that precisely because I leave tips, because I leave money on the table, I may just as well not be particularly concerned with making money. And in this sense, I would find it reasonable from your perspective to have a world where precisely because we are in a an economic system based on humanomics, we might not really have enrichment. It would seem plausible, if not sensible. A second issue is in your example of...
Shall we talk about this first issue just for a moment? Just for a moment, let me just say, yeah, I think you could do a socialist humanomics. I think it's perfectly sensible. I don't think it's correct, but as a policy, and I think it's bad for humans, but still, socialism too can be given a humanomics interpretation. So it doesn't have to be capitalism.
Fine. The second issue has to do with your, you said if you wear an ugly dress, this is going to upset a lot of people, but after all, it is respect. Everybody is supposed to respect your dignity and leave you with your ugly dress. obviously we could extend the example to you going around naked or going around with weapons and causing fear, if not anything else. The issue is, aren't you really, is there really a threshold where your respect of your dignity is consistent with the respect of dignity of all others?
Well, that's of course the core definition of liberalism, and I claim in this new paper that it's equivalent to equality of permission. I'm permitted to. Well, you know, this has happened in our lifetimes practically, that I'm permitted. Well, let's talk about me personally. I'm permitted to wear women's clothes, even though every cell in my body says XY, namely male. And I wish they would shut up, but they don't. They keep saying X. But if you see what I mean. And then what women and men are permitted to wear has changed dramatically over our lifetime. When I was a young teenager and went to a private school in the United States, we had to wear suit and ties. And indeed, when I was in college, at Harvard College, we had to wear suit and ties to dinner. So yeah, there's the mutual constraints that if I expect to have dignity accorded to me, respect, then I must do the same to other people. I like to think of this in terms of the two versions of the Golden Rule. The rabbi, Jesus of Nazareth, expressed it as, do to others what you would want them to do to you. But 50 years before that rabbi, another one, Hillel of Babylon, put it, now hear this, do not do to others what you would not want done to yourself. And I think if you put these two together, you've got modern liberalism. You're to respect each other. I don't know, it's kind of, it sounds kind of silly when you put it this way. Be nice to other people. Be nice. And don't take their stuff. First is Jesus, the second is Hillel. And those two together are a pretty good, but of course, the problem is that this is not a behavioral equilibrium, you might say. Because people are envious and angry and hateful, some of them are, and all of us are sometimes, right? You as our great James Madison said in the Federalist Papers, if people were angels, there would be no need for the state. So I'm not an anarchist. I believe we need a state, but as you said, there's a line to be drawn as to how much you should accord to the state. And John Stuart Mill points out that the more we give to the state, the danger is that we'll become children. We'll be dependent. I find it very puzzling that there aren't more Italian liberals, because every sentient Italian knows governo ladro, see? And yet they go on voting for more and more power to be given to the state. So this is a puzzle.
Any other questions? I don't see hand raised.
Raise a hand. I want to steal more of your ideas.
Paolo.
I see two of them.
Oh, no, please let Hisham Hakim. I know I can. I mean, Deirdre knows that I can talk for hour with her. So let's leave Hisham to talk.
Okay.
Yes,
Paolo and I
Yes.
are writing a book together, so
Oh,
we
really?
have plenty of time to talk.
Okay. So
Well-
please.
Well, thank you so much for the discussion today, this morning. That was really insightful. I'd like to rebound on Pablo's question about collectivists because we know that there used to be lots of experiments in collectivist economies, whether in Nazi Germany or in Soviet Russia, with and it was actually called humanistic economies.
Oh, was it?
And economies of humanism. For example, I know that Alexis Carrel, who was a Nobel in biology, he was part of a project on humanistic economies, and the idea was that to make a progressive progressive sociology and humanist economy in a collectivist regime. We know the idea, but I was just I wanted only to point out that fact about history, and maybe hear your thoughts on this.
Well, my thought is the same of the great guys. The names escaping me. I'm 81, and names escape me frequently. But who is it? The great student of insects at Harvard University. He also applied them to. He also talked about applying them to humans too. But what was his name? E.O. Wilson, is that his name?
Exactly.
E.O.
And
Wilson.
they did.
He said once, he was asked by someone what he thought, what E.O. Wilson, who was a very great scientist, I think everyone agrees, even if they don't agree with some of his extensions of his study of ants and bees and so forth. He was asked, how do you feel about Marx and socialism and collectivism? And he said, I think Marx was completely correct. I think that top-down planning and subordination and hierarchy is of the sort that he had in mind, what is wonderful for. The only problem is he had the wrong species. That is, socialism, collectivism is fine for ants, but not for humans, was his point. I of course don't think I was a Marxist, kind of an unscholarly Marxist when I was a kid, and know how it feels, so to speak. But I think that coerced collectivism is bad for us in lots of ways. For one thing, who does the coercing? Quis custodiet ipsos custodes. You put Lenin in charge, and things might not work out so well. Who's this guy in Singapore? He's much wiser, but Lenin, though very intelligent, was not. And furthermore, I think it's worth emphasizing that the so-called competitive market, which makes people think of, oh, it's terrible, it's so mean, it's cruel, it's red in tooth and claw, you know, it's competition, we're hurting each other all the time. After all, this market society, this liberal market society that we have in part, but we also have part socialism, is a massive system of cooperation. I mean, when I buy my, I don't know, my pen, it's produced as Adam Smith, and before I'm a French writer on these matters, said that the pen is made by thousands of people spontaneously working together to arrive at a pen for Deirdre. So but I think the earlier suggestion is very good, that Bart and I in this essay and I in my thinking should be paying attention to the people who are not classical liberals like both of us are.
So
even John Stuart Mill, of course, was kind of a hinge, as Joe Persky has pointed out, between classical, as in fact, as everyone who reads Mill understands, between classical liberalism and the new liberalism in England of the 1880s. The new liberalism said, contrary to classical liberalism, let's solve the social problems of the world, England in particular, Britain, with the tools of the state. And that became social democracy. It also became socialism. And you know, some problems are exactly right. If the Black Death comes again, I want the Italian and US and German states to quarantine people. I want them to exercise coercion. If Canada invades the United States, I can hardly sleep at night for worrying about this, because the Canadians, you know, are very aggressive and dangerous. And I want the federal government to raise a force of soldiers to stop them. So there are things the state does well. And I think we, you know, as I said, I'm not an anarchist.
thank you. So if there are no more questions, I don't see other hands. I
could go on talking. We should keep, we could keep this link open for the next 8 hours. I could go on talking about this stuff.
Sure.
I think it is time now to thank very much Paolo Silvestri for organizing this meeting, and to thank very much Marco Guidi for the questions and comments. And first of all, to thank Deirdre Closkey for being with us.
Grazie mille.
Thank you so
you.
much.
I've enjoyed
it.
it.
It was so interesting and so stimulating.
Please, anyone here or elsewhere who wants to talk to me about this by email or personally, please do send me an email. I'm now at the Cato Institute. I'm no longer in Chicago. I'm at the Cato Institute in Washington, but the best address is Deirdre, you've got to spell it right, 2 at UIC, University of Illinois, Chicago, uic.edu. And I'd be delighted to carry on this conversation, because I noticed that I've already learned things.
Thank you again. It was very, very special for us to have you today.
Ciao ciao bambini.
Ciao, ciao, have a nice
Un
day.
bacio ancora.
Ciao.
E poi
Bye,
per
everybody.
sempre sul nostro amore.
Thank you. Thank you.
Arrivederci, arrivederci.
Ciao Deirdre.
Arrivederci Roma.